Hey there friends, Andrea Walford here from Make Beautiful Cards. Today I want to share a video tutorial on some fun ways to color your ribbon with alcohol markers. Now although you can use any alcohol markers, the ones that I will be demonstrating with are Stampin' Up's Stampin' Blends. So let's start by going over what you're going to need for this technique. First off, make sure that you're working on an absorbent work surface. This is a messy technique and your color is going to bleed through your ribbon. So the surface that I pretty much always work on is what you see here, which is grid paper. Now speaking of messy, if you don't want color-stained fingers, then you may want to use a glove. Now I only use one glove because I use it on the hand that I'm going to be holding the ribbon with. Next, you're going to need your Stampin' Blends in whatever colors you want. Or if you don't have Stampin' Blends, any other brand of alcohol marker will work. But it has to be alcohol. Why? Because they dry with a permanent finish. Once your ribbon has dried, the color won't budge. With dye-based inks or markers that have dye-based inks in them, if your colored ribbon is exposed to any moisture, the color can bleed. Finally, you're going to need some ribbon. Light neutral colors work best. And it doesn't just have to be ribbon. You can also use trims like this one that you see here, or you can use threads like this linen thread or this crochet thread. Just keep in mind that light neutral colors work best. So white, cream, even a light color like craft or pastel colors. Just know though that if your ribbon is colored, so for example, if you're going to color something that's this color of this linen thread, which is like a craft color, it's going to interact with whatever color of alcohol marker you use. So in other words, you're not going to get the true color of the marker the same way you would if you were working on a white thread or ribbon or even a cream colored ribbon or thread. Now also note that the texture or finish of the ribbon can affect your final results. For example, I find that this open weave cotton ribbon tends to have a much duller finish than when I use this ribbon here, which has a little bit of a satiny sheen to it. That satiny sheen comes through in the color, so you end up with a ribbon that has a little bit of sheen to it as well. Now there are a couple of things you're going to want to keep in mind when you are coloring your ribbon. First, if you're going to be covering the surface of your ribbon with just one color, use the brush tip of your marker. So if you take a look at your alcohol marker, you'll see that there is a brush tip and then there is this bullet tip. Now, depending on what brand of alcohol marker you're using, your tips may be different, but most of the time they'll include a brush tip and then a tip that's either a bullet or let's say a chisel point tip. So if you work with the brush tip, which is bigger, so let's take a look at both tips here for a second. You'll see this is bigger. You're going to cover the surface area of your ribbon a lot faster than if you work with the bullet tip. However, when creating patterns like the ones I'm going to be showing you in this video, and like a couple of the ones that you see here, you're going to want to use the bullet tip instead of the brush tip. And that's because the bullet tip is finer and you're going to have much more control over the spread of the ink. Finally, you're going to want to work with a light touch, whether you're using the brush tip or you're using the bullet tip. You don't want to be holding the tip of your marker onto your ribbon. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of bleed. So I'm going to start by showing you how to color your ribbon a single color. But before that, I want to show you some examples of cards where I've incorporated ribbon that I've custom colored. So here you can see I colored my ribbon green to match my card. This is the exact same ribbon, but I've colored it blue, so it would coordinate with this card. And then here's again that exact same ribbon, which I've colored with this magenta color, again, so it coordinates with my card. So that's the beauty of custom colored ribbon. You don't have to own all sorts of ribbon colors. You can just color your own to match your project. So what you're going to need to custom color your ribbon, so choose your color. I'm going to be just doing a straight color right now, which is I'm using my Dark Magenta Madness Stampin' Blend. I'm going to be using this white ribbon. Now this comes in the Flowers for Every Season ribbon combo pack. So it's part of a pack of 3 different ribbons. So this is what we're using. And then of course I have my glove here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that on. I'm right-handed, so I'll be coloring with my right hand and holding my ribbon with my left hand. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're coloring, so it is going to bleed through, it's going to be kind of messy, so that's why I do use my glove. You also want to make sure that you cut and color a little bit more ribbon than you're actually going to need for your project. And that just gives you a little bit of extra wiggle room because the ends, depending on what you're doing, aren't always as clean. So for example, for a project like this one, what I'll do in order to determine how much ribbon I need is I'll start with my ribbon a little bit longer than where I want the edge to be, and then I'll loosely do whatever ribbon technique it is that I need just to get a sense of how much ribbon I need. See, so I would do something like this, and then I would see, oh, okay, this is about how much ribbon I need. And then of course, because my grid paper has ruler lines, I can tell how much that is. So that's 11 inches of ribbon. And that's actually quite a generous amount because I was not being careful as I was pleating my ribbon. So once you know how much you need, then you can go ahead, use some sharp scissors to cut your ribbon. Now coloring is as simple as using the brush tip. So remember I said when you want to color an entire surface, one color, you're going to color fastest with your brush tip. And you can see I'm holding my ribbon on an angle and I'm running it onto or across the surface of my ribbon. And notice, remember I was telling you, you don't want to hold your marker for too long in any one spot. That's because look at how fast the color starts to bleed out. Now when you're coloring just your ribbon a single color like I'm doing here, then that fast bleed doesn't matter so much. But when you're trying to create a pattern and you want that pattern to look relatively neat, then you want to make sure you don't get a whole bunch of that bleed. You want your colors to stay in the pattern that you're trying to create. Now when you're doing this, so you can see I've gone across and I've colored. I always like to flip my ribbon over and just take a look if I need to color the other side. You can see here that we can still see some white from the trim. So let me just hold that up. So hopefully you can see that. So you can see here that this side, so this side is pretty much all colored, but this side, the ribbon didn't, or the color didn't quite bleed through, particularly on the edges where it's a little bit thicker than the ribbon itself. So that's why I will come back with my marker and then I will very quickly go over the back side again, paying special attention to the edges to make sure that those get colored. Now, once you've finished coloring your ribbon, you are going to want to give it a little bit of time to dry. So I will usually set it aside and then wait. It doesn't even take 5 minutes, but usually I'll do this first and then I'll set it aside to dry while I'm working on the rest of my project. Now, the other thing you might notice when you're coloring is that initially the color may look a little bit patchy, but as this dries, just like when you're coloring with alcohol markers on paper, as this dries, the color does tend to even out a little bit. So here you can see now what our solid color looks like. So really, you can see it doesn't matter what color of alcohol marker you have, you can now custom color your ribbon. So the next thing we're going to look at is how to create a striped pattern where you have your stripes running horizontally all along the length of your ribbon. So here you can see an example of a card I created using a ribbon that I custom colored like that. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So once again, I measured out how much ribbon I needed by basically laying it in the pattern that I knew I wanted it, and it came out to 13 inches long. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to cut my ribbon at just a little over 13 inches. The other thing you have to keep in mind when you're accounting for the ribbon length is that you're going to want to trim the ends of the ribbon as well, because you can see here in this card, I trimmed them on an angle. Now, when you're creating horizontal stripes, it helps to use your grid paper lines as a guide. So this is a 1/2 inch wide ribbon, and you can see here I'm aligning it. So this is the center mark of my grid paper, and then each marking area here is a quarter inch high. So I'm laying it on top of that, so I now know that that line is the middle. So I have here an acrylic graph ruler, not quite long enough for my ribbon, but that's okay. I can slide it down afterwards. Or if you have a second ribbon, you can kind of butt it up against the end of the ribbon. I sometimes do that. So I'll grab a second ruler that I have and I will place it like so, just so that I can create my continuous line. Now, I'm actually placing my ruler slightly underneath where the halfway mark is, because I know that the color is going to bleed a little bit. Now, what I want for my center line is my darkest color. And once again, I'm going to be using the dark Magenta Madness. Now, this is a case where you don't want a lot of the color bleeding. So instead of using the brush tip, we're going to be using the bullet tip. So using my ruler as a guide, I'm just going to lightly touch down and start moving. I'm not going to hold it because otherwise it'll bleed too much, but I'm going to move slowly because I do want just a tiny little bit of bleed. I don't want my line to be too narrow. And then you can see I was able to seamlessly transition to my second ruler. So there you can see what that looks like. Now, if you find that it's not quite dark enough, you want a little bit more bleed, then you can go back and do this a second time. Now notice where I touched down at the beginning, how I ended up with a lot more bleed. So that's another reason why you want a little bit of extra ribbon, because where you start and stop, you're going to end up with more bleeding. So now I don't use my ruler anymore for the rest of this. And you can see we're now going to take our other colors. Now this time I'm going to use my brush tip. So I'm going to hold my ribbon and I'm going to brush this tip along, and you'll notice where it meets the color in the middle, you're going to see how it interacts. It re-wets that color, and because alcohol markers blend together, it's going to cause a little bit of blending and bleeding. So you can see how it's pulling that color in towards it. And then once again, you're going to want to make sure that you flip your ribbon, and especially where the edge is, you're going to want to run your marker back over that. Now we're ready to add our final color. So once again, I'm going to flip my ribbon. I'm going to take, this time I'm using my light Mango Melody, and you can see I'm coloring. And you can color a little bit over the other marker. You can see to kind of reactivate that and to get a little bit of blending. And you can see where the two colors interact. The pink, the magenta, and the mango interact to give a little bit of an orangey color. And then once again with this side, as with the other side, you're going to want to flip this to make sure that your edges are colored. So there you can see how that color looks. Take a look at it when you're done. If there's any areas that need to be touched up, like you can see here, it looks like it's a little bit lighter. You can just go back with your marker and you can touch it up. And at this point, I'm going to set it aside to dry. Now, just a quick note, when you're using a ruler to create your patterns on your ribbon, you're going to want to clean it afterwards because it will pick up some of the marker color. And then if you use it again with another marker color, the alcohol in the second color will reactivate the marker that's on here and it'll muddy the colors. Now, the fastest and easiest way to clean the dried alcohol marker off the edge of your ruler is simply using this cotton pad and some rubbing alcohol. And 70% alcohol or higher is fine for that. So next, let's take a look at how to create these little vertical striped pattern on your ribbon. And you can see what it looks like right over here. Now, you can see the piece that I used here is probably only 4 inches long, but I cut myself a 6-inch piece because then I can use whichever portion of my ribbon kind of turns out the best for my card. So for this, I used 4 different colors of green. I have light soft sea foam, and usually what I like to do is I like to see what my colors look like. So that's my soft sea foam, and remember we're working with the bullet point because the color is not going to spread as much. This one is my dark mint macaron, so that's what that looks like. Then I have my light shaded spruce, that's what that color looks like. And I have my dark shaded spruce. So just a refresher for a couple of things to keep in mind. Don't hold your ink your marker to the ribbon for a long amount of time because otherwise it's really going to bleed out. But just know that when you're creating these patterns, so you saw when we created this pattern, the ink is going to bleed, and that's because the fabric is pulling at the color. So the colors blend and mix together. But for me, that's part of what makes this effect so cool because it gives it almost this watercolored effect. So creating the horizontal stripes is similar to creating creating the vertical stripes is similar to the long horizontal stripes. I'm just gonna start with my lightest color. Now, sometimes for my light color, I do actually want to apply more of it. So I'll apply, because it's okay if the darker ones overlap it. So I will use my brush tip for the lighter one. Then I'll come in with my next color. And when you're trying to create stripes and you don't want it to go all over the place and end up with these ginormous stripes, the best thing to do is to go over the same area. So let's see what I'm gonna do next. Maybe I'll do this one. Okay, so I'm gonna do, notice I did one stripe. Instead of moving down, I'm just going right over the same area. And now I'm going to do my super dark one, and I'm going to go right on the edge of this medium color. Now, because the surface of the ribbon is rough, it is going to catch along the marker, and that's kind of the sound that you're hearing. I'm going to do a little bit more of this color. I'm going to come to my next color, overlapping a little bit. Actually, this color, maybe we'll use the brush tip as well. And if you apply one marker over another one because the surface is wet, that's going to pull the color and cause it to spread faster too. You can also go back over colors. So here I'm going back over the lighter one down there, and you can see here, once again, I'm overlapping, and if you don't want a lot, you don't want it to spread a lot, then just do that one line. And then you really just continue on with your pattern. And there you can see what this looks like. And again, as with the horizontal striped ribbon, I will flip it over and I will do the same thing on the other side, making sure that I follow the same order of the colors. Now, one thing that I do want you to notice, when you're coloring, initially as the ink touches the ribbon, the color is very dark and vibrant, but as it dries, the color will dull a little bit. So you may find that you have to go back over your color a couple of times if you want to deepen that color. So here you can see as I go back over it again, I'm deepening it. The only thing to keep in mind is that you're going to want to do this once your ribbon is dry. Otherwise, you can get a huge amount of bleed in that color. So you can see already how where I've gone over the color again, it's deeper than where I only had one layer of the color. So that is how you create this vertical striped pattern. So today I've shown you 3 different ways you can color your ribbon. So with the solid color, with this long horizontal stripe, with these vertical stripes, but really you're only limited by your imagination. For example, take a look at this ribbon here where I decided to create diagonal stripes. You could experiment with almost like a polka dotted effect, only you're not going to get like perfect polka dots, but you could color one color and then you can come in and just touch it with other colors. I mean, there's so much that you can do. Now, as I mentioned, you can also do this technique with other kind of trim or thread. So I just wanted to show you what that might look like. So here is this scalloped lace trim from Stampin' Up! And I'm just going to take the brush tip of that Mango Melody, and you can see once again as I run this over that lace trim. Take a look at how pretty that looks. Now, as you can see, to get a nice even color, you're going to need to do a couple coats. So you're really going to need to pay attention to the ribbon you're using. You'll notice whether you have to do a second coat or not. There, isn't that a really nice looking trim? See that yellow there? And then take a look here at this crochet trim. So look at this. I got this huge big ball of crochet thread at my local big box craft store. And now let's say I want to create some shaded spruce trim. Once again, just take the brush tip of my marker and I run it on this. Now this is, as you can see, this is a little bit trickier to color because it has It's not flat like ribbon is. It's, well, round, cylindrical, not really sure what to call it. But you can see as long as I just rotate it in all directions and make sure that white is covered, completely covered by my marker, I now have this fun green trim. Just note that you're going to need to experiment with your colors to see what color it turns out. Like you may find that if you want a lighter color, you're going to actually need to use a lighter color of marker. So for example, if I take this one here, so this is my light soft seafoam, you can see, because I'm going over it multiple times, that it's actually a little bit darker than it might be if it was on the ribbon. But look at that, I have this multicolored trim. Now remember when I was mentioning to you that if you use something that's already colored, the color is going to look different. So let's try this with the magenta. This is my linen thread. And if I run this over, so you see I can color this with my marker. Again, it's a little bit more persnickety because I'm working with these fine threads. So you can see I've colored it, but it's kind of dark. So you do want to make sure that you don't go too dark with whatever your thread, trim, or ribbon choices are so that it doesn't affect the final color too much. So there you have it, friends. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial and learned some fun ways to customize your ribbons, trims, and threads. As you've seen, you're only limited by the colors of alcohol markers that you have and your imagination. So I hope you have fun with this technique, and I'll see you soon.